Today, though, once again, I'm really excited to have our guest today, Dan Olsen. Dan is the author of the Lean Product Playbook. He's been in product management for as long as there's really been such a thing as software product management, it seems like. He was one of the early innovators at Intuit and has advised countless small and large enterprises on lean product development practices, as well as product management strategy, and so on and so forth. A few weeks ago, we had a great discussion about Dan's book, The Lean Product Playbook, here at Product Coffee. And a lot of questions came up as part of that. And so we asked Dan to join us today, and I'm really excited that he was able to talk about modern product management and some of the things that he's observed and learned, and to take your questions as well. So I prepared a few questions. We're going to start off, but this is a real Q&A in a town hall format. So if you have a question you'd like to jump in and ask Dan, there are two things you can do. One, you can throw it in the chat and we'll try to catch it, or you can raise your hand in Zoom or throw a question in the chat on YouTube if you're watching the live stream, and we'll try to get to your questions as well. So for now, I'm gonna switch over and welcome Dan. How are you, Dan? Welcome to Product Coffee.
Hey, Jason, thanks. I'm good. Nice to be here.
Yeah, we moved it to a later hour so you could wake up and join us fully awake.
Yes, us Californians, exactly. Yes. Yes.
Welcome. So I wanted to get started and just kind of throw a big one out for you.
Okay.
Lean Product Playbook has been a transformational book for a lot of companies and a lot of individual professions. It's really helped a lot of people guide their way into being effective product managers. We published the book, it's been almost 6 years ago now, right? Like 2015, 2016?
15,
so,
yeah.
And I know you and I know you've consulted with a lot of companies since, and I'm sure you've had some observations. So I think one of the things that we were talking about, one of the questions that came in was, so if you were rewriting that book today, what would you change? Is there are there some things that you would add, something that you would do different, something that you would take away? What would you change or do differently if you were writing that book today?
Yeah, it's a good question. The book is basically like a documentation of kind of my product management learnings and philosophies from my career, and also interacting with, thousands of product people at talks and workshops. So I think the good news is the short answer is not too much, because I think it's kind of evergreen principles and philosophies. That being said, there are some things that I developed after the book was done. I just, writing the book, it's over 350 pages. It's very comprehensive. It's very long. It takes, for those of you that have written a book, it's a very intense process. So a couple of things that I've added since then are basically for the importance versus satisfaction framework that's in the book, basically as a way to prioritize the problem space and opportunities. I always wanted to create some kind of visualization. Those of you know, my book has over 50 tables and figures. I'm really big into visualizations and visual frameworks because I think they make it really easy to understand things. I always wanted to have a visual representation of the opportunity score. And it wasn't until 2019, I was doing a workshop with a client that I finally came up with a way to do that with like a heat map that goes from red, yellow to green. So in some of my talks since 2019, you can see a heat map visualization. I think that helps provide a more intuitive way of visualizing it. So that's one thing that I would add. And then the only other thing probably would be in the value proposition chapter. What I like to do in general is share a framework, in a kind of a generic format, and then share real world examples. I just didn't have time to get the real world examples in there. And so in some of my talks, again, since the book, you can see real world examples, really good examples of value propositions for Instagram and Uber that are in some of my public talks. So those are kind of things, kind of a little icing on the cake that would have been nice to have, if I could go back in time, add those things in. Other than that, it's just things like, the tools always change. You're always at risk if you mention tools that they're going to change by the time somebody reads it. So there's some new tools like Figma and Adobe XD that are out there, but the general concepts and premises, I think, still apply. So.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah. One let's pivot over to the larger product management concept for a minute. And, if you look back over the last decade or so, I think even as we heard this morning, there are some really common challenges that product managers face, and there's a lot of content on. But as you look over the last 10 years or so, what are the biggest changes you've seen in how product management is operating that really impacts the way we need to think about leading within our companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest change is just the explosion in awareness of how important product management is, right? I mean, it feels like in the last 5 years or so, it's really taken off. And as I like to point out, like, Mark Andreessen kind of famously said, software is eating the world. And everybody kind of saw that happen. And then after several years, they realized, well, software is eating the world, but if you want to have good software, you need to have product managers. Otherwise, we're just going to build stuff that people don't want, right? So I think that's kind of why it's kind of lagged, but people have finally catch up and realized, gosh, we need to really make sure that we're aligning what we're building with what's going to create customer value. And that's where product management comes in. So that's been the most exciting thing to see, is just, the emergence of product coffee and all the other product management resources and communities and learning tools online. So then as a result, there's more demand and more people are getting into it, into product management. So there's probably more product managers now than there have ever been in the history of the world. Some other general trends, obviously agile adoption has increased. A higher percentage of companies are implementing agile, which is great. UX design, I see UX design is also something that people are becoming more aware of. It's kind of funny because it's been over 10 or 15 years when people kind of, realize the importance of it. But I think part of the thing is you constantly have new people entering the tech world. And so they don't know what they don't know yet. And so everyone has to all the new people have to learn that UX design is important. The other big trend, I think, is analytics. Product managers are increasingly expected to be more analytical. The tools have gotten significantly better in the last several years. The tools like Heap and Amplitude and Mixpanel really let you see what's going on with user behavior and retention and what features and usage are really making a difference. And then that naturally goes into A/B testing and experimentation. So increasingly, you're seeing product managers have to know more about UX design, know more about analytics. One unfortunate trend is, as I was thinking about this question, is the decrease in QA. In the early part of my product management career, I worked at Intuit, and QA was like a solid member you could count on the feature team. You had, PM, you had engineering, you had QA, you had documentation back then as well. But it's become like kind of, unfashionable to have QA in a lot of companies. And I understand theoretically, it's like you're the CEO and it's like, okay, I have a budget for one more headcount. I can hire one more engineer or I can hire a QA. Well, when you've got 2 or 3 engineers, sure, hire another engineer. But when you got like 50 engineers, maybe then go hire a QA person instead of a 51st engineer, right? So anyway, and then the unfortunate thing about that is, as I like to say, good PMs abhor a vacuum. They'll fill the gaps. And so if there's no QA, guess who's going to be doing the QA or UAT? It's going to fall on the PM, right? So we're getting pulled. It's kind of a generalist job where you get pulled in different directions. And so you're getting pulled into the UX design direction. Again, in my talks, I talk about how there's often a UX design gap. Your company may have designers, but maybe your team doesn't have a designer. So who's going to do the wireframes, right? You're probably going to step up and do the wireframes. You're getting pulled into analytics, you're getting pulled into QA. So you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. So there's more things for PMs to do. There's more on our plate. We're also usually understaffed. We talk a lot about ratios of PMs to engineers, engineers to PMs. And in some places, I'm glad to see that the ratios are getting better. But in some places, I talk to some companies like 20 engineers for 1 PM or 15 engineers for 1 PM. There's no way that PM is going to be able to do all the things they need to do to keep up with that, right? So, and the last thing then is you've got all these new people becoming PMs. There's just an increased need for training. We used to always say you can't get a degree in product management. Well, Carnegie Mellon has a degree in product management, but it's only for a certain number of people that do that. So for all practical purposes, most people are not getting a degree in product management. And so it begs the question, how does one learn product management, right? And there's I think it's a variety of combination of like books and blogs and videos and workshops and talks and things like that. And that's why over my career, I've transitioned from doing consulting to doing way more workshops. And so I love that. So I've seen that myself, training a lot of companies, a lot of bigger companies that are coming around to modern product management principles as well. So those are some of the trends that I've seen. So I think it's an exciting time to be in product management.
I agree, it really is, it's been a crescendo really for as you pointed out the last decade. It really has evolved both within the companies and then clearly as a profession with the emergence of larger and larger organizations paying credence by offering a degree program or even certificate programs, even if not full degrees. And then
Right.
Emergence of groups like the product school that is just kind of has taken a kind of a mass market approach to training product management basics and principles. So there's been a lot to do there. One of the things that you said that was really interesting as you were talking about those challenges and changes is the nature of so many organizations to stretch their product people too thin and the ratios are way off. Do you have an approach that you found really successful to figuring out? Is there a rule of thumb that you think is the right ratio? Or does it vary from organization to organization? And how do you go about assessing what that ratio ought to look like with the team?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's basically, product management, product development, it's not an exact science. I come from like an electrical engineering background, physics background. So, when it comes to Mother Nature and the laws of nature, it can be very precise. This is more like, well, let's just plot out the empirical ratios we see and where do teams seem to be successful and where do they seem to have problems, right? That's kind of how I pragmatically look at it. And it does vary a bit, but in general, the main way it varies, well, let me just talk about general numbers. I personally like the range of like 5 to 7 engineers to PM. That's I think a lot of successful companies operate in that range. And that assumes that there's some amount of UX. The biggest variable is like how much UX is there. Somebody had a good joke here. Brad said, every time I work up wireframes, my UX resource just feels more secure about their job, right? So, that's what I mean by the design gap. Of course, we'd love to have, I love to have designers and have talented designers whenever we can. So, that 5 to 7, more broadly 4 to 8, and you get in a 4 is a very luxurious place to be. But some companies that have a lot of UX, a lot of front end customer facing functionality, they'll have like 4 or 5. I mean, and that may sound like a crazy stretch from where some of you are living, but I've seen companies with 4 or 5. You don't tend to see, anything better than 4 to 1. Like, you don't see 3 to 1 or 2 to 1 or 1 to 1 on engineers. So 4 to 1 is kind of the most I've really seen. And I think, 5 or 6 is a great place to be. And then, when the way it's okay for it to be a little bit bigger, part of it is if you do have dedicated UX, if you do have dedicated UX design resources, and you do have dedicated QA resources, right? And perhaps in bigger companies, you have dedicated program management or project management resources, then then it's okay for the ratio to be a little bit higher because those things have been taken off the plate of the PM. So what I'm talking about is kind of like a fully loaded PM, a pretty fully loaded PM. You want 5 or 6 to 1 roughly. And also, we didn't talk about this yet, user research. Who's doing the user research? Is the PM doing it? Or do we have a separate research group who can help out, right? That's another thing that tends to fall on our plate as well. So, and then the last thing is that in teams, sometimes there's a lot of back-end stuff and there's not front-end stuff. There's a lot of back-end work and APIs or machine learning or something. In those teams, you tend to see slightly higher ratios. Maybe 10 to 1 or something like that. But I'd rather never really want to see more than 10 to 1 because I think that just ends up stretching your PM too thin. And then the ratio, we can also talk about the ratio of PM to UX as well, right? And typically what's healthy there is about 1 to 1 is about what, for again, assuming there's user-facing functionality. If there's not user-facing functionality, it's fine for it to be lower than that, or if there's less user-facing functionality. But if you're constantly working on, user-facing features and functionality, you want it to be about 1 to 1. Now, one of the tricky things about that is there's not just one flavor of designer, right? In the slightly older days, we would call people either visual designers or interaction designers, which I think are much clearer terms. The design community loves to reinvent their terms every few years just to keep things fresh. And so nowadays we're stuck with UI designer versus UX designer, which is incredibly confusing because people mix those up all the time. And so what they're trying to say is the UI designer is what we would used to call a visual or graphic designer. They focus on the visual design, the colors, the fonts, the shapes, making it aesthetically pleasing, making it, look good. And the interaction designer, which now is supposedly called the UX designer, is the one who's thinking more about the organization, the information architecture, the flow, the interaction design. And so when we say one-to-one, it may not be one person per se. It might be half of an interaction designer or half of a visual designer kind of on your team. So it's not uncommon. I mean, it's great if you can get a fully dedicated designer on your feature team. That's awesome. Sometimes they're a shared resource, and often there are shared resources that also get stretched thin. A lot of my clients that come in and do product management training workshops, and they've been staffing up their PM team for the last, say, 2 years or so, or 2 or 3 years. And like the UX team is just like 2 years behind them. Like, yeah, we just started staffing our UX team, right? So I'm teaching this workshop. It's full of engineers and PMs, and there's usually like 2 or 3 designers in there because design is lagging on the hiring front, as far as the adoption curve within that org. So that's another ratio that's important. And when those ratios are right, and you've got talented people and dedicated resources, that can really make the difference between being able to do a really good job, enjoying your job, feeling like your team is putting out good product that's really solving customer problems, or just frantically trying to keep all the plates spinning. When your ratios are out of whack.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that kind of optimal ratio, I've observed in my own career, that seems to be kind of the sweet spot, but it does depend on that placement of the right additional resources. The less you can, I've tried to keep my focus as much as possible on the customer and the user and the market as a product manager. And the more time that you have to spend filling those QA support roles or the wireframing roles, the harder it is for you to really spend the time working with the market and really making sure that you're aligned to the right first principles. So I have a question.
One other point on that, Jason. One other point on that is you can also get sucked into the agile scrum management black hole as well, and spend all your time just doing scrum meetings. And I like what you said. The number one job of product manager to be the expert on the customer and their problems. And if you get QA may steal some time from you and UX may steal some time from you. But the thing that I see steal a lot of time away from being customer facing is getting sucked into the PO, product owner kind of agile stuff. So just a word of advice for PMs out there. Your job is not to just manage the backlog and do that. Your job is to be the expert on customers and know what their problems are. And so
I think one of the big mistakes I made in my early career, Dan, to your point, is I went and got a certified Scrum Master certification. Now, being a certified Scrum product owner or doing the product owner training, I think gave me a skill set that really did help in the agile implementation in our company and helped me to do that job better. But that Scrum Master role, then the company wanted me to be the Scrum Master, and that is a complete time suck. So if you're just getting into product management and you're thinking about getting a CSM certification, my personal advice is don't do it.
It makes sense because you're like, hey, I want to learn about Scrum. This says Scrum Master, Scrum. Let me do this, and it's only like a day or two or something. So it's like whatever, it's no big deal. So it can't hurt, but I hear what you're saying. The other thing, just dirty secret, is most agile Scrum teams don't have Scrum Masters. Don't have dedicated official Scrum Masters. Like, don't tell the agile people that, right? But it's just a luxury you can't afford. You can't afford to have someone just sitting around, hey guys, do it this way. Yeah. We don't need an agile armchair quarterback. Now, I'm not trying to minimize the role. In certain organizations, I've seen very effective Scrum Masters, but what I'm trying to say is many teams do not invest in that role or put dollars behind that role at all. They expect the teams to kind of self-organize, and either the product manager or the engineering manager or tech lead to step up and wear that hat. So I think a Scrum Master more typically is like a hat. Who's wearing this hat? It's not as common, although you do see it for it to be an actual real person. If it is a person, they're definitely not just on one Scrum team, because it's not a full-time job for one Scrum team. They're usually spread across multiple teams. And it's usually early in a company's agile transformation that they use the Scrum Masters to help people get up to speed. But then I've seen again several years later, then they end up kind of realizing, okay, we're going to reallocate these resources to something else. So.
Good point. Yep, thanks. A little diversion there. Hey, we got a question in the audience here. I want to throw it over to Tiago Broom, who has a question for you, and I want to remind everybody else, if you've got a question you'd like to ask Dan, throw your hand up or shoot me a direct message, and we'll get to you. But go ahead, Tiago, take it away.
All right, thanks, Jason. Hey, Dan. So I remember in 2018 during Mind the Product, I was like eagerly seeing you like during your keynote and taking pictures of Spider-Man and Dubert on the same slide, right?
Yes.
And one of the things that really stuck with me during that time is to spend more time in the problem space rather than the solution space. So following up on this topic of spreading thin and having like to wear many hats, and many people like entering the product management role or the product management world, and a lot of tech people getting in tech in general. Do you think that we might be going too much leaning towards the problem space because of this ratio issue and not really focusing on actually to the solution space and not focusing more on the problem space as we were supposed to do?
Yes, I mean, definitely, man. I mean, yeah, as I say in my workshops and talks, like we live in the solution space, so it's natural human behavior to just propose solutions, right? So it's, as I like to say, it's a learned behavior. It's a learned way of thinking to be able to stop and separate, right? So if somebody comes at you and says, hey, I think we should add a drop down, that's a solution. And normally in a feature team conversation, we would debate, should we add a drop down or not? And if everybody agrees, guess what? We're going to add a drop down, and nobody really knows why, right? So the key thing about the problem space, it gets at the whys behind it. So I think it's less, the ratio certainly doesn't help things, to your point, Tiago, because, as I like to say, engineers, their job is to ship code in the solution space, right? So that's natural that they would be focused on solutions. They like to build solutions. Designers have to create mock-ups and designs in the solution space, pixels that are in the solution space, right? So as I like to say, like, developers develop, designers design. So what is product manager's main job? And I like to use the word define. If I had to pick one word, our job is to define what are the customer needs, and how can we address them? And that's in the problem space. So if anybody on the team is like mainly on the hook for owning and understanding the problem space, it's the product manager. Now, would it be great also if the UX designer also embraced it? Sure, that'd be great. And I think really good designers, that's what they do, is they bridge the problem space, solution space. They listen to what the PM has to say and what customers have to say and say, okay, given that, let me come up with a solution that I think might address that, right? And even if engineers are involved in the product space. So, that problem space, that's probably one of the number one symptoms when I talk to people that reach out to me for my workshops. If they're familiar with our work, they say we focus on the solution space. It's closely related to the idea of outcomes, outputs over outcomes. Yeah, we're shipping 21 story points every sprint. Yay. Okay. It's like, what does a story point do? Like, what does that do for a customer? Nothing, right? So what did you actually do to either, increase customer value or move some critical business metric, right? That's the same idea, right? So it's so easy. And I think it just goes down to competency and skill level. If you don't know any better, you're just going to focus on the mechanics of Scrum and shipping 20 points every Scrum, being proud of that, right? The next level up, and don't get me wrong, you have to get the mechanics down, right? Without being able to ship things, and get through the mechanics of how do we actually get something built and shipped, you're not going to create any value. But the next level up then is like, okay, what I like to say when I talk to Agile groups is imagine for a sec, wave a magic wand, and you guys are the best Agile team in the planet, right? You have a super high velocity. You always perfectly predict your points. You nail it. You launch on time. You have no bugs with your code. Imagine that's the case of your Agile team. Now the question is, what do we put into the sausage factory? What do we put in? You can build this stuff or you can build this stuff, right? And so that's what the problem space really is about, is like, what do we work on that's going to create the most customer value? And so I think, again, it's a learned behavior. it's natural for people to just kind of gravitate towards the solution space. It happens all the time. Another simple example I love, it's kind of like a certain like sixth sense. Once you realize it, you see it all the time. Someone will be like, say there's a group of people that want to go to lunch. Hey, I think we should go to, Ming's Chinese restaurant. They just proposed a solution. Why did they propose that restaurant? Well, maybe it's because they know the group. They know the group likes, Chinese food. They know this is a good place because they've been there or whatever. But they didn't share any of the reasoning or criteria. They just told you the recommendation, the solution, right? It's like, maybe that's the best restaurant for us to go to. Maybe it's not. This happens all the time. People are, kind of making suggestions and debating in the solution space without really getting at the underlying whys behind it. So thanks for bringing that up. I think it's really important. And I think it's kind of like this light bulb moment when product managers in their career realize, oh, wow, we're just so focused on solutions. The rest of the team is so focused on designing and building solutions. Who's really thinking about the customer problem? And that's my job. And so I want to work with, researchers and designers and customers to try to figure that out.
I love the way you brought that back, and it's really in alignment to a question that we were talking about in the roundtable portion of Product Coffee earlier this morning. We were talking about that fundamental nature of customers to often bring solutions, or stakeholders to bring solutions, to focus on outputs over outcomes, and also even outside of that, to ask for things that may not even be in alignment with the right direction for the product or the company, and so on and so forth. And we had a question about saying no. And the nature of the question was, we often do have to say no to customers, or should say no to customers. Sometimes we don't actually do it. But how do you, Dan, say no to customers in a way that really demonstrates value to them?
Yeah, and I think so, the question was really about internal teams, but the same thing happens, as you said. I caught the tail end of the pre-discussion. Stakeholders are notorious for this, right? Like executives, they have an idea in the shower, they come to work the next day, the day, and they go, hey, here's what we got to build. We got to have a chatbot, right? Or we got to have, we need ML, we need deep learning. All those shiny objects, it's called shiny object syndrome. They're always solutions. It's never like, hey, I just had this great insight about a customer problem. Let's figure out how to solve it. It's always just, I was listening to a podcast and blockchain's hot. So what's our blockchain strategy, guys? We need to figure out our blockchain. It's like whatever the technology du jour is, it's almost always a solution, right? Customers also do that, as you brought up, especially B2B enterprise customers, right? And, what I love, I work with both startups and established companies. And, when you're a startup, you're trying to survive. You're looking for revenue. And so, say you get some meeting with Google and they say, okay, we need you to build this thing for us. What's the small little startup chasing revenue going to do? They're going to say, yes, sir, and salute and just build whatever they wanted, whatever they spec'd out, right? Well, the problem is most of those big companies and big clients, they didn't know, they weren't clear on the problems. They were specifying blockchain or chatbot or whatever it was. And so the number of times I see some startup trying to please some large enterprise client, build what the enterprise client asked them for, and then the enterprise client not use it, it's really sad. It happens all the time because they were in solution space the whole time, right? So I think part of being a good PM is saying, yeah, I hear you're asking for a widget. Help me understand why is that going to be valuable to you? So even if somebody comes at you with a solution like that, you want to understand the problem, because very often the solution that isn't the best, the one that they came up with isn't the best way to solve that problem, or the highest ROI way to solve that problem. So back to your question, you do need to say no, and no sounds harsh. And so I think I heard someone say this, and I agree with this. You're not really saying no. What you're saying is not for this planning horizon, right? If we're talking about the quarter, the roadmap for the quarter or for the year, that's the problem, is when you say no, people think that means never. That means you're never going to build this thing. And that's not really what we mean. Now, sometimes it's true. That's why we have a thing called the ice box. Yeah, we're going to put your feature in the ice box. It's okay. Yeah, it's in there. Don't worry about it. It's in there, right? So some features we're saying really no, it's very unlikely. But other ones are really just saying not now, right? And you're just saying not for this planning horizon. And the thing you want to do, especially in enterprise, is avoid kind of one-off requests. You don't want to go build some feature that only one person in the vertical or in the industry really needs. you want to kind of make sure that what you're building is going to be leverageable by like 60, 80%, hopefully at least, or maybe 100% if you're lucky, of that vertical. So you can then go and sell it to someone else. So you constantly have to be on the lookout. On the one hand, you're chasing revenue. You want to get the revenue. On the other hand, you want to kind of be strategic and be smart about what you're building, making sure it applies to other people. So that's kind of the balancing act. And, you know, some companies, as they get successful and grow over time, they have to, what we call, fire their customers. Like their original V1 customers are no longer a fit because they've kind of pivoted and grown. And, you know, it may seem painful because no one ever likes to get rid of customers or revenue. But some companies, when they become so successful, they have that clarity. They finally get that clarity of, this is our market. This is our product. This is where we have the best product market fit. Yeah, we kind of got here through some stepping stones of slightly different verticals. Now it's time to, you know, we decided we got to adapt our business model. We're subscription now. And if those people don't want to do that, you know, oh, well, then I guess they're not the right customers for us. So product market fit, you know, in the beginning, we're always focused on the product part of the fit, but you also need to think about the market part of the fit. Are you chasing the right market or not? And so, you know, again, I like to say, you know, not now. You can also kind of show, you know, you can show your clients why you're building what you're building, why other things are higher priority. That's the other thing I like to joke about. Anytime we're talking about any one feature, we're sitting around the table and there's like 100 features we could build. You know, we talk about feature X. When that feature X has the spotlight on it in that conversation, of course, it's a wonderful feature. Who wouldn't want that feature? Why wouldn't you want that feature? I like to say it's like a cute little puppy. Oh, look at this cutie. Look at cute little puppy. Who could say no to this cute little puppy, right? And that's fine for that one puppy. But then it's like feature B. Oh, look at this one. And you have 100 cute puppies and you have bandwidth to build 5 this quarter. So you have to decide which of the 5 puppies are we actually going to build. They're all cute. No one wants to say no. And so, you know, in a way, we're just kind of dealing with reality. And so relative prioritization, the number one hack or tip I have is don't fall into the trap of letting someone talk to you about one puppy at a time. Get your arms around all 100 puppies and say, okay, let's do some multi-voting here. And it's amazing when you do multi-voting in a group, some puppies end up being cuter than others and some make the cut and some don't. But when you're talking about each one, no one's ever going to say, yeah, let's kill that one. It just needs to emerge kind of as collective wisdom when you do the prioritization of the whole list. You know what I mean? So that's my top way to get people to realize why this feature or puppy is more important than this other feature or puppy is to do some kind of group voting thing. And then kind of, you know, common sense usually prevails.
Great, thanks. Appreciate that. We've got some quite a few questions coming in from the audience. Before we switch over to them, and I do want to like really shift gears and start getting to the questions from the audience, but I do have one more that I'd really like you to weigh in on.
Okay.
We got into a pretty heated discussion a couple of weeks ago in our book discussion about the concept of the MVP, the nature of an MVP, what is really an MVP, and there were some pretty broad statements about what an MVP could be. And I've observed as part of that conversation and a bunch of others that really that notion in the first place it's been misapplied and misused by a lot of teams, not intentionally, but they're trying to embrace lean thinking. And you know, sometimes people say a prototype or a proof of concept can be labeled as an MVP, but it doesn't yet really rise to the level of viable if it's just a prototype, right? And in your book, you draw a pretty specific line between the concept of MVPs and MVP tests and candidates. But do you think that term MVP is really redeemable in today's business and product vernacular, or has it just been stretched in too many different directions at this point? What do you think?
Yes. So I'm not surprised to hear you had debates about it because it's probably the most hotly debated topic or term in the product world, right? It's just people have like debates about it, violent debates about it. You know, it's bad when people start inventing other acronyms: minimum lovable product, minimum sellable product, minimum valuable feature, maximally valuable. People they just don't like whatever they perceive MVP to be. They don't like some aspect of it. So they invent a new acronym to patch that flaw that they see, right? We don't want to just be viable. That sounds horrible. Let's be lovable, right? And usually it's like an exec that does that, right? So I remember I was going to speak, I was about to go on stage at this company conference, they had asked me to come talk about lean product principles. And they said, right before I go on stage, "Jay, just so you know, our executives don't believe in MVP. They believe in minimum lovable product." I'm like, oh, well, that's I'm not going to be talking about that. So it's, it really comes down, it's a typical thing. This happens a lot where, words matter, unfortunately. And this happens all the time in the program. We use these little shorthand labels and nobody ever stops to talk about and define what that is. It happens all the time. MVP is probably one of the worst offenders, but it happens all the time in the product world. We're also busy running around. We use shorthand labels, and different people coming from different companies and different backgrounds just assume those things mean different things and never get clear on it, right? So the problem you asked, is it redeemable? The problem is, I don't think inventing another term is going to help. We already have enough of these silly terms. So I think what we should do is, and it's not going to happen for 100% of people, is just try to better understand what it means. And the way I like to characterize the debate typically, and you can even see it in the way you asked your question, is, there's usually two camps. And I like to usually I'll do a poll. In fact, let's do a poll right now. Let's do it. Can we do a poll? Maybe we can do one. No, okay. You can just basically say, like, is a landing page an MVP, yes or no? And you can do a poll, right? If you want to do that real quick, we can do it. Can you create a poll real quick, Jace, or no?
Yep, I'll do it.
All right, let's do that. It's simple. Is a landing page an MVP? Yes, no, and then we'll see what people say. We'll just do it
in a minute, and we'll keep going.
Yeah, cool, man. So let's just do that and see what. Now people are chatting. We got 3 no's and 2 yeses. Someone says it depends. Unfortunately, you have to pick yes or no, Christina. And then other people saying no. Everyone's saying no. Heck no. Wow, getting strong words there, Mark. Heck no. Nope. Jay says nope. Maybe. Maybe. No. All right. No. It's a prototype. Okay. Vanessa, no. Well, we got no's. I don't even know if we need to do the poll. We only have a few yeses. We have mainly no's here, right?
Oh, we'll launch it.
There we go.
Anyway.
Cool. All right, there we go. There it is. Cool. All right. So here we go. You should see a poll somewhere. I think I know how this is gonna go. We'll see. People are quickly voting. 50% of people have already voted. 60% of people have voted. Get your vote in, folks, if you want here. You should see a pop-up.
If you don't vote, you will not have a voice in this industry-changing poll here and
That's
now.
Right. That's right. We're going to settle this once and for all. We're going to settle this MVP debate once and for all. 74% voted. All right. I'll give you a few more seconds to get your vote in. Call it if you want. Go ahead. There's 75%.
I think we're at a callable margin here.
All right. I think so too. Let's do it. We have 75% of precincts reporting. So you can share the results. There you go. Okay. Oh yeah, you can do the share. All right, cool. So you guys, did everybody see the results? 85% said heck no. 15% said heck yes. Right? So what's going on? So the way I like it, there's usually 2 camps, and it seems like we have more of the hardcore camp, which is like a landing page, an MVP. What are you talking about? Don't you know what the P in minimum viable MVP means? It's product, Dan. A landing page is not a product. Anyone can create a landing page. It's just like a sales brochure, a sales slide. That's just slideware. That's not a product. So that's usually how the hardcore product people go, heck no, no way. And then the other people at the other extreme, they're a little more liberal and open-minded. It's like, hey man, anything you can learn from and test your hypotheses, that's an MVP. It's all good. Why you got to be so harsh, bro? So like that's the 2 camps. And in my experience, they're never going to agree. They're just going to dig their heels in and they're not going to agree. And so that's why, as you mentioned in my book, realizing they're never going to agree, the hardcore people are never going to allow a landing page to be a product, right? They're like, and so the way I get out of that trap is to try to go up one level and call them all. Can we use an umbrella term like MVP tests or MVP experiments? And then I look at the hardcore people and I go, if we reserve the MVP term for true product things, can you be open-minded to let a landing page be an MVP test or MVP experiment? And they'll usually begrudgingly say, well, I guess so, as long as we reserve MVP for the hardcore stuff. So that's kind of how we get out of that trap, right? So, and that's the funny thing is, that's one of the things that leads to the issue is, does it have to be a representation of a product or not, right? or can it be a representation of the hypotheses we're trying to test? Like, I want to test our value prop. Do people even value this thing? Can I do a landing page test to see if people value this? Like, would they even value this if we built it, right? And then within the product world, even then there's a range there too. It's like, well, wireframes, is that a MVP? I mean, certainly live product, no one's going to say live product is not an MVP. Even the most hardest core people be like, yeah, if it's live and launched and people can use it, that's definitely an MVP. The next thing back is like, okay, if it's like a private beta, is that an MVP? And then you go back and it's like, well, we've got some like really, really super interactive prototype. It's not the actual final code, but it's a super interactive prototype. Is that an MVP, right? And personally, I'm not at the super extreme. I see both sides, but for me, a prototype is a good representation, like clickable, tappable prototype. I use those all the time to test MVPs. Now, the interesting thing is you're not saying that's your literal MVP. You're testing it. It's like, what do you plan your MVP to build? What do you plan to build for your MVP? The problem is some people are so hardcore that the only thing they can do then is go build that MVP. So it's fine to get alignment on, as I like to say, what's the scope of your MVP? Like, what's your MVP scope, the functionality scope, right? And the whole point there is you don't want to boil the ocean. You want to be able to say what you want. Back to what we were just talking about. Can you say no? What features can you say no to or not now to, right? So that you're not, because the problem is, again, back to the puppies, if you're sitting around and like, you're okay, we're going to have these 4 features in our MVP. We had the tough conversations. We've agreed on this scope, in fact, I have a slide here I can share real quick to show you guys is, this is one of the top mistakes I see teams make with MVPs is you've got some kind of like, roadmap and you've broken things down and you've got people to agree that, okay, we're going to go with this bare bones MVP and check it out. We're going to prototype it and get feedback. And then what happens is some stakeholder sees this and they go, wait a minute, you're not going to have feature P1A in your MVP? Are you serious? Oh my gosh, I think IBM is going to freak out. And there's a lot of like noise and hand waving. Usually there's not a lot of evidence or data. It's just a lot of noise. And then the team says, oh, okay, I guess we'll put that in. They pull this in. What just happened? They were mesmerized by the cute puppy and they fell for it. And they just added 6 to 8 weeks to their launch date because of that thing, right? Nobody talks about the trade-offs on the launch date. It's just, I got to have this puppy. This puppy better be in the MVP or else big client X is going to freak out. And if it was just one of those, that'd be fine. But then what happens? A day or two later, some other stakeholder says, wait a minute, you're not going to have P3B in there? Oh my gosh, I think it's going to be horrible. And so next thing you know, you're pulling all these features that the team, kind of made the tough call that I think this can wait. I don't think it needs to be in V1 or whatever version we're planning. And then you have a kitchen sink MVP, it's bloated. It's ironic because the whole point of an MVP is to not overscope whatever release you're planning. It's a mindset, right? A lot of times when I do my workshop, people say, yeah, I see how it applies to version 1, Blue Sky product, but it's a mindset. It applies to version 1.1, 1.5, 2. What needs to be in that version? What can wait? Every sprint you do is MVP mindset. What stories really need to be in this sprint? Which ones can wait? It's the same thing, right? So that's what I see happen a lot with people is people pull those things in. And so what you want to do is have the tough discussion about what is the minimum scope. And then instead of going and just building this thing, right? So there's 2 parts to this MVP mindset. One is what's the minimum scope we can build? The next thing is, well, don't go build it then. Go prototype this and go test it with people. Because they may tell you, oh yeah, that's how I like to solve these debates. If there's some stakeholder banging on the table saying, I think we really need P1A, what I like to point out is if we just put P1A in, what did we really test? We just bit the bullet. We just took the hit and we wrote the check. So what I like to do is kind of do a little Jedi mind trick with them and say, well, how might we test that? Sounds like you think that customers are going to think the product is horrible without this. We think it's going to be fine without it. How might we test that? We have different hypotheses. How might we test that? Well, the simplest way to test it is to go like do a quick mock-up or wireframe of the product without it, show it to 10 customers, and I'll be the first one to tell the stakeholder, hey, if like 7 or more customers complain about that feature missing, we will gladly say you were right and we'll put it in. But maybe, just maybe, nobody or it's only 1 or 2 customers say anything about it, and then we can move forward, right? So that's the thing is you want to make the tough calls on what functionality do we think we're going to need to build for our MVP. But instead of going and then building it, you want to actually prototype it because you're not going to get it right. Nobody gets it right the first time. You may realize they don't care about P3A and they do want P1A, or there's some whole feature you didn't even think about that you need to address, right? So that's the other thing is people assume that you've got to build whatever it is. So, but you don't, you can prototype it. So that's why for me, clickable, tappable prototypes are a very effective way to test your MVP hypothesis. Whether you want to call that itself the MVP, if you're a hardcore person and don't want to call the prototype itself an MVP, I can understand that. But don't let that thinking make you skip testing the prototype and just go build it. Because building it is the riskiest thing you can do because you haven't tested it yet, right? So while I have a sec, I want to share my newest favorite, if I can, MVP framework. That right? So when it comes to MVP, the other thing people don't like the term MVP, it feels like we're being shoddy or we're cheap or we're cutting corners, we're shipping something suboptimal to our clients, right? And that doesn't sound good or feel good to people, right? And that's not what it's about. It's about really understanding their needs and what is required. But anyway, whatever alignment we get on, we decide on the vision for our product, what we're going to build this quarter. And usually it's like we envision it's going to be amazing and beautiful, like this horse, right? Like we're going to build this beautiful horse this quarter for our customers. It's going to be awesome. And then we start working on it, right? And we start working on it. Everything's cool. We start building it at the beginning of the quarter. But then we start hitting some delays and surprises. We start running into issues and like, we're starting to feel some pain. And so we kind of cut some corners a little bit. And the next thing you know, it's like March 31st is coming up. We're like, we just got to get this thing out. That's how it ends up, right? So that's kind of like, don't let this happen in your product. As I like to say, it's amazing how many features ship on March 31st, June 30th, and October 31st. These magical dates in big companies. I don't know, something magical happens at the end of the quarter, right? It's just like all the stuff ships then. And so, MVP mindset with kind of hard date constraints and limited resources is a bad combo. You see MVPs like this shipping all the time. And then what happens is executives go, oh my gosh, that MVP didn't work. We got to go back to waterfall. See, this just doesn't work out. And you've got to have the flexibility to understand once you make the tough call on the MVP, you should really not just have arbitrary dates like the end of the quarter. If if surprises come up, if you're learning and you need to iterate, give the team a few more weeks so that you have a better chance of getting the proper MVP out the door. So anyway.
Very good. I love that. Thanks. Thank you so much, Dan. I also recognize some of the terminology from your MVP candidate chart there. Looks like it came right out of Econo analysis as well, or at least you see some terms that are aligned with that concept.
Yeah, it comes because it comes after the value proposition, right? You want to get clear on your value proposition, which does apply the Econo model, and then use that to frame the MVP scope discussion. Yeah.
So I had a couple questions coming in, and we're going to jump around a little bit into a couple of different concepts. We had a question earlier, really asking you to kind of, if you could kind of weigh in a little bit on the product management career evolution and path. Specifically, what do you see as the growth ladder for a product manager today as you're looking across all your clients and seeing people evolve from the beginning of the career path to more senior levels in the career path? What are you seeing those paths look like today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's funny because I started my career at Intuit, which was pretty well defined for product management back in the day. And I think everyone's kind of coming around to just a similar model where usually the entry level position, I mean, we'll just talk about titles for a second, then we could talk about what they mean and we could talk about other aspects of the question. But usually you start out as a product manager, PM, and then senior PM, at some point you become a senior PM, which is acknowledging that like you're able to take on more responsibility. Usually it's one way to think about it is like, what percentage of the product pie are you responsible for? And when you're a PM, you might just be like, 10% of the pie, there's 10 PM or the whole team. Among the whole team, we've divided the product up and you own this one area, or you're working on effectively 10% of new features. Eventually you'll get to a bigger set. If there's meaningful divisions in the product, you might be responsible for a whole section of the product or a certain sub-product within a bigger product line. And then if you're at a smaller company, usually the next title up is director of product management. If you're at a larger company, they might have an intermediate level, a group product manager, or a principal product manager, right? So it just depends on the nature of your companies. In smaller companies, they won't have that level. You don't have so many levels in smaller companies. And the interesting thing about a director, that's one now where the titles aren't necessarily consistent. In some companies, that means you actually are managing other PMs at that point. Director is usually the delineation title for when you're managing other PMs. You can see a group PM managing other PMs, but not common. And it's interesting in the product world, you know, we don't have like these crazy fan out, I call it fan out ratio, like how many people report to each person, right? In the engineering world, you might have these huge 400 people orgs with like 10 people reporting or 20 people reporting to one person or something like that. The PM world is not like that. Usually it's 1 to 3 to 4, something like that. It's kind of like more like Jedi. You have 1 to 1, you're like 1 to 1, 2 to 1, Padawan going on. It's so we end up being, you know, it's funny at Intuit, we had like, you know, my first year I was a PM and we had 1 year product cycle. And then I got promoted to senior PM. And then the people that reported me, they were just 1 year behind me in business school. But that 1 year of experience going through the product cycle was enough to be kind of the next level up, if you will. So, so then director, sometimes you manage people, sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's just a glorified individual contributor. It's like a higher individual contributor title. You know, I've spoken to directors in both startups and large companies where they're a director and they have a lot of responsibility, but they don't have any reports. So there's no guarantee that you're going to have reports as a director. And then after that, you know, sometimes big companies, again, they might have a senior director, but usually the next title is VP of product. And, you know, almost always as a VP, you're going to have someone reporting to you. And then some larger companies may have SVP, and then there's CPO, Chief Product Officer. I mean, you know, that title has become more popular these days. I think it's good in the sense that because it has a C there, it's like kind of you're at the table level of the seat, you know, seat at the table kind of as a CMO or CFO kind of a thing. Honestly, practically speaking, the difference between a VP and a CPO is usually not that different. Sometimes a CPO might have slightly broader purview. Sometimes you see engineering reporting into a CPO. You almost always see UX design. Let me say it's common for, which is great. In the old days, UX design, because it was more technical on the front end, it would live under engineering. Now we've seen it transition. Usually the head of product has, you know, the UX design under their team. Usually there's like a director of UX design or a head of UX design or VP of UX design. So there's not like they're the main person, but that follows. It's nice that when they do that, what's nice is UX and PM are closely aligned. It's also not uncommon to see the head of product have, now speaking of user research resources underneath them as well. And also analytics, increasingly analytics. You see the analytics team, it's a logical place for it to live underneath product, as well as potentially growth teams, right? Sometimes growth, it sits somewhere between marketing and product, but I've seen fully mature large product teams where a product leader has the PM org, they have the UX design org, they have the research org, they have an analytics org, they might have a growth org. If it's a really large company and they need program management or project management, that might live there or it might live in engineering, kind of just depends. So, and you know, one of the key things about the PM track is you can kind of, in the beginning, you start out as an individual contributor, an IC for short, and you can keep going up pretty far as an IC. And that's kind of what you're seeing more principal product manager titles being used. That's kind of usually comparable to director level. And the main difference when it's a rationalized titles, it just means, hey, you're at the director level getting kind of director level comp, but you're an individual contributor. You don't have any direct reports. Whereas a director is the same level of kind of responsibility, but you've kind of now transitioned into management. And so that's an important transition in a product manager's career. Same thing kind of on the engineering side. Imagine you're some rock star coder, you're coding, and the reward you get for being such a good coder is they make you a manager. Well, the problem is now you used to spend 100% of your time coding, and now you got to spend like at least 50% of your time just managing people. The same thing in the PM world, right? You're just like doing research, writing up requirements, writing user stories, meeting with stakeholders, meeting with customers, meeting with PMs, and then you become a manager. And you know, you need to spend your time managing people instead. You know, and usually it's like
your product becomes people.
Yeah, your product becomes people. And usually the first time you do that, you're still like a player coach. You're still like, you will probably still hold on to some responsibility for some key aspects of the product while you're also managing people. But that can be a very tough transition for people because we usually are so under-resourced. Many good PMs learn like, I'm just gonna do this myself. I can't count on other resources. So you fall into this trap of, if you want it done right, do it yourself. And then when you become a manager, you have to change your mindset, because if you just do that, you start to like over specify things to your team and micromanage them, or you might even jump in and do it if you feel like they're not doing it right. So it can be a tough adaptation for some product people to let go and figure out how to switch gears and delegate and specify more objectives and whys to their team. and how to coach them, right? And that's the other thing is, having worked it into it, I was fortunate. We had really good management practices, really good managers, one-on-ones. Unfortunately, everyone's so busy these days that one-on-ones often get thrown out the window, or they get delayed, they get canceled, or you end up spending the whole one-on-one just like working through tactical issues. And the reality is, yeah, you should, if you need to use some of the time for tactical issues, that's great. But really, it should be much more about aligning on objectives, talking to the person about, how you can help them, how you can eliminate obstacles, like what their growth and development, needs are, things like that. So.
Anybody else have an open question that we didn't get to? I saw Yona over in Romania was specifically pivoting back to the question around defining and this is from the YouTube channel. He was focused back on the problem space versus the solution space, and wanted to know if you found any particular workshops or exercises that are particularly useful in helping your stakeholders or your customers really, or your teams really focus in on defining the problem space versus keeping their eyes on the solution space.
Yeah, I mean, one, reading my book is a good resource. I teach workshops on that. That's what I do. I mean, one of the top symptoms, usually it's a product leader or CEO that pings me and says, here's the challenges I'm facing. And one of them, if they're aware of problem space, solution space, that's usually one of the top things that they bring up is, hey, we're too focused on solutions. I would recommend using the framework. So in my book, I show an example of a problem space definition for TurboTax, basically, right? And that's an example of the best way is probably by example is you basically get people to brainstorm in the problem space. And what you do is you teach people about, you inform people. This is what I do in the very first day of my workshop. After we cover the product market fit pyramid, lean product process, and we cover target customer, then we just talk about problem space, solution space, and then we just brainstorm problem space for a particular opportunity. That's what we do. So what I would recommend if you're trying to facilitate this in a company is you can get my slides. They're all at just danolsen.com. You can get my slides that kind of walk through the difference between problem space and solution space. And then you can say, great, now let's brainstorm problem space for our thing. And because you've just primed everybody, there's still going to be a little bit of what I call solution pollution when they brainstorm. Maybe like 5 or 10% of the ideas are going to be solutions instead of problems. But it'll be way better than if you just said, let's brainstorm. If you just sat down and brainstorm without prepping people on problem versus solution, you're going to get like 99% solutions and not problems. And so that's the key, is like just separating it. And then later what you do is, as I like to say, it's not about never doing solution space. It's just about getting clear on problem space before you do solution space. Then you can take each of the problems that you've identified as important to solve, and then you can do a separate brainstorming and say, okay, given that we want to solve this customer problem, now let's brainstorm all the different solution ideas that we have. So it's about, instead of like jamming it all together into a munged up brainstorming session, you separate the problem brainstorming from the solution brainstorming, basically. And I mentioned real quick, I teach public workshops every once in a while. That's one of they used to be in person, but with COVID now, it's the beauty of it is I can get people from all over. So I have one coming up on August 17th and 19th. I shared the link there. If anybody's interested to ask questions, you can ping me. But otherwise, if you want to do it yourself in your company, just grab the slides, from my decks, and you can try to facilitate that conversation.
And you also have a monthly meetup that you run as well.
I do.
Silicon Valley Lean UX and Lean Product Meetup, right?
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I've got a link to that on the resources page.
Thanks.
So absolutely. And you've got about 10,000 members of that meetup now. That's insane. Congratulations. Great group. Thanks for doing that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great. I started it 7.5 years ago. And when COVID hit, we took it online, which in hindsight, it's good. Because now people don't have to be within 25 miles of Mountain View to do it. So anybody can join. We have people from all over the States join. We have people from New Zealand, Australia, because the time zone works out. So yeah, I just shared that link in the chat as well. But yeah.
Cool, great. Well, thanks again for joining us today, Dan. And thanks everybody who joined us at Product Coffee, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, best of luck with your products. Bye.